Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Ang,
And I'm Cindy Kay.
and this is our new podcast called Superpower and Sidekick. So, Cinda, how long have we known each other, and how did this come about of us doing a podcast together?
Well, I believe we met in 2000. We were both taking spiritual classes. So obviously, we're both spiritual seekers, and that has been a lot of the backbone of our friendship over the years. And for myself, I have a lot of people asking me questions in my DMs a lot. They know that I'm psychic and that I use a lot of my superpower capacity. And so I get a lot of questions about it, and I'm wanting to put the information more readily available for everybody.
Yeah, and how would we do that?
By having and hopefully interactive discussions and allow people to ask questions and give ideas for topics of things that they want to hear about. I would like it to be very interactive. So that way, everybody's seeking a little bit different things to be able to bring more divinity into their life, to allow that divine connection to guide their next steps, so to speak.
Yeah, and so what was your reason for um, kind of seeking that spiritual path? Because for me it wasn't so much that I was seeking, but more that my parents kind of got into it, and
I was going to
then
say, your parents kind of drug you there at the beginning.
yeah, exactly. So I was dragged. I mean, I was like in college at the time and wasn't really interested in any of that stuff. So but they dragged us, all of us kids, to take the class, and I just kind of kept going.
Myself, I was having all kinds of awakening things happening, but the world around me was telling me that I was schizophrenic rather than telepathic. I'd also come through a lot of trauma, so I was really seeking that connection for solace and for healing as well. But also, I was born psychic. I had every one of the clairvoyant, claircognizant, clairsentient, all of them since I was a small child, and I had no clue how to use them. And it's very confusing in this world and in the mundane world to have those abilities but not have any understanding about them. So that's what sent me on my path.
And how did you come about this class? Because for me, it was just taking one class after another. And then I think at one point we met in St. Louis.
But it was
And
always just
that
one more
was,
level, just one more level.
yeah, yeah. And that was kind of the beginning of a beautiful friendship for 24 years. And we've gone through a lot together. Certain things you know about me and things I know about you, and there's struggles that we've had in our lives, and but yeah, like if you look at just like on a physical level of our day to day, it's very mundane, and
It's a
and
normal life dealing with a lot of the same normal problems.
mhm.
I may even create more for myself than some people do.
Yeah, and so how do we, I guess lately I've been thinking more about, as I get older, looking for, I guess, for more meaning in life and not just the mundane. I mean, just, 9 to 5
Working, paying
job or
bills.
working. Yeah, working, paying bills. I mean, like you said, is there anything more to this? And I believe that there is. And I think both of us kind of got into it, and then now we're kind of really digging deep into that area, and that's why we wanted to do this podcast in order to kind of start the conversation, right?
And share our own path with it and get more feedback and more understanding. I think the larger we grow our community, the more information there is, and that also keeps that one person from controlling everything. It's a roundtable conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And so I guess the one thing that we can start with is like just how to help people to get connected, because it seems like we are all disconnected right now from the divine, right?
we we are, and a lot of the old teaching that there was a lot of teachings about how to connect to the divine before colonialism and a lot of the changes on our planet that led us to more of an industrial state. And we're starting to go back, to that renaissance, and people are seeking spiritually again and looking for more because they're not finding satisfaction in the life that is provided just in the normal society realms. There's a lot of information like through the chakra system and different teachings from the past that are actually coming back forward and helping people to activate those abilities within themselves. I mean, and that's how we met, was we were learning about the chakras. And to this day, that is still how I do a lot of my connecting with the divine, especially if I'm doing any of the psychic work or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's old
So,
meets new
mhm. So do you meditate every day?
every day. I have since I was probably 23, 22, 23.
Mm.
And I do think it does take a certain amount of dedication, maybe not to the level of mine. I came from some pretty severe trauma. And so it was an instant way for me to find relief. And even in the beginning, I'm going to admit I was using it for spiritual bypassing, to bypass that pain and just go into another realm where I didn't have to focus on it. Now, my life path made it where I had to come back and deal with that. But by that time, I had the tools to do it. Well, using spirituality for multiple different reasons. It's not, it is such a big topic that it's not just for one reason. And so my dedication to my, I'm very dedicated to my meditation, but I have a lot of incentive to do so. A lot of that seeking is real inside of me.
So I guess for me, I try to meditate every day, every morning, but sometimes I'm not successful. And
You
so
connect regardless. Do you take up that moment? You connect to try to start to try to at least meditate.
yeah, yeah. I
See,
start with a prayer in the morning.
to me, the that's the real thing, because you, through intention, and intention's everything, you ask and open the door to the divine every day through just that simple ceremony that you start, even if you can successfully meditate or not.
Mm. Hmm. That's good to know. Because
So I
usually when I start my day with just a prayer, and what I and in my prayer it's more about uh, like, because throughout the day you make different choices and decisions, right? To do something or not to do something. And so for me it's more a prayer so that when to make my decisions with love and wisdom, that everything that comes from my decision is because of love and because of the wisdom that I receive from the divine.
and that's essentially, that is my meditation practice, is opening the door and allowing, asking, inviting divinity and spirit into my life to make it a co-creation, because I know that we have limited, we have the two eyes, even though a lot of us have that chakra 3 open, the third eye open, but using it in the mundane world can be confusing. So just, I know for myself that whenever I let divinity in, when I let that divine lead, things go better. So I've learned through
Yeah.
trial and error, the days that I've forgotten to, it made a difference in my day.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right, cuz I do have that same issue where if I don't connect, then my day is kind of screwed up.
But generally, it'll show me I forgot to, and I remember to
Uh-huh.
connect. I
Yeah.
do. I do absolutely believe, though, that just the intention to connect to that higher source, it's already done.
Mhm.
If we see it or not, if we can totally get into the frequency to where we can hear or not, that can be another story. We are still living in the physical world, and we're going to have bad days or even happy days where we're so excited it's hard to connect. You know, it's
Mhm.
not just one way or the other. Emotion can make it feel like we're not connected, but it doesn't mean that we're not.
Well, that's good to know because some days I feel like I'm so disconnected because, like, throughout my workday, it's stressful. And so, how do you bring yourself back to that state of, I guess, equilibrium or,
That is where I
you
do
know,
incorporate. I study yoga, I study Sanskrit, mantra, mudra, a lot of things because I found that Sanskrit is an actual frequency language, so it can take your body into different frequencies. Now, that's not everyone's interested in that. I think that there is a million different tools out there of ways that we can bring ourselves back into a spiritual state of mind, and rather than just rah, 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 I have to do this, I have to do that, and bring that other in. And it can be essential oils for some people. Sometimes just that olfactory gland can help to bring those feelings back in. Number one that has always worked no matter what is breathing exercises for myself. And whenever I do it, that I also meditate to connect to the divine whenever I'm doing it. I work with angels and other different kinds of high frequency energy, and all of that almost always goes on breath in that pranayama. So, and it's also a good practice, even if you're an atheist and you don't believe in any kind of a spiritual practice at all. Breath brings you back into, what you're doing when you're doing it, and you're no longer mindful, or you are mindful and you're not mindless, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just about the breathing, it brings consciousness back in line.
yeah, and I feel like that really does help the breathing exercise because a lot of times, when we're stressed, it's like, your heart rate goes up and
The itty bitty shin
you're,
can go off between your ears.
yeah, and it's hard to turn that off.
And part of that is because stress does carry a frequency with it, and so it lowers our frequency.
Mm.
It's kinetic, and so that starts bringing in the worried thoughts, and we basically are tuned into that channel in that moment. But we can actually be in two states at one time. You can be stressed, but working to direct your antenna to a higher frequency and actually be in both worlds. you
How do
know
you do that?
First off, accept that we're not perfect, and that we're humans and we're just doing the best we can, because a lot of people really expect perfection, especially when it comes to meditating. And we need to drop the whole concept of perfection and just knowing that we're imperfect beings, allowing that higher frequency and that higher knowledge to come in and work through us. So we have to accept that, hey, I'm in the world and there's something right here that's stressing me out, and accept ourselves for that, and not trying to push ourselves into perfection, but still open the window and open the door for spirit to come in.
Yeah.
That
Well,
that
perfection,
can,
I think, is something that a lot of people have a problem with. We all like to be perfect. I think I'm guilty of that and being a control freak because you want everything to be perfect.
but that's also a big part of the forced codependent society that we are currently living in. Perfectionism was put on us through peer pressure in order to control us.
Yeah, that you have to be a certain way in order to succeed, or you have to look a certain way in order to attract whatever you're trying to attract, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mm.
So perfectionism is really forced on us through the brainwashing nonstop every day. There's nothing that we can do to get out of it. It's part of our conditioning. But the more that we understand that it's there, the more we can consciously drop it and say, I'm also part of nature, and look at nature. She's messy as she can be.
And I think that's also a level of self-awareness too, right? That we are getting sucked into this mentality of perfection. And so slowly, when you recognize that, then we can start to kind of
Drop it.
drop it.
Exactly. And that's full circle. What we were talking about is using breath to do that. You know, your brain works with or without you running, at the helm. Our breathing works. It's an automatic, no matter what. If we tell ourselves to breathe or not, we're going to still breathe. But we can actually take it and start controlling it. We can't do that with our heart as easily as we can with our breath, for instance. So whenever you think of your breath being kind of like your thoughts, and using them in tandem, that you can use your breath to start taking control of your thoughts. And it's not so much trying to control,
Mm.
because the second you try to put the cat in the bag, it's going to fight you, and your brain will do that. It's more of, wait a minute, I can tell that I am tuned into the itty bitty shitty committee and it's not doing me any good here. So I'm going to choose to change my dial by changing my frequency so I can go to a higher frequency understanding of my situation.
Yeah. And our thoughts are very powerful. So the more that we put out, negative thoughts, um, the more it comes back to us, right? Like if somebody is annoying you, and the more you think about how annoying they are, the more you get annoyed by them, right? So it
Every
just
single
continues to manifest.
Well, energy is kinetic. So whatever you focus on, it's like you're bringing all that to you
Right.
in that moment. And, resentment, that can breed a life of horrors for a person. And, we are also within the patriarchal type world, we're actually trained to have resentments against people within the conditioning. So there's a lot of things that we're having to work through with conditioning to be able to go, no, that's not how I want to do things. And I'm going to take control of my own mind and start doing it. Not control. I'm going to take the reins and start giving better guidelines for myself to follow. And I think that's really what the point of meditation is deciding to point our antenna to the highest frequency rather than our worries and our fears and whatever else might be going through us in that moment.
Yeah, because it seems like when I am connected to that higher frequency, not only do I feel happier, I feel more, I guess, secure, not worry as much,
Grounded,
um, grounded. Yeah.
expansive.
Yeah.
You can
Like,
definitely,
like,
it's tangible.
yeah. And I think a lot of that is like not worrying about the outcome of something. You just kind of go with the flow, and you know that it'll all work itself out.
Well, we're physical and spiritual beings. So every thought we have is kind of the control to our hormonal system. So if we stick on stress, we constantly have stress hormones. If we aren't doing things every day to bring in the happy dopamine levels, we don't have them. So there is the spiritual and science that are working together in this too. That not only are we doing it this way, but it's also tapping into nature's pharmacy within our beings that helps to release the hormones that help us to be happier,
Yeah.
because they all work in tandem.
One of the things that I struggle with sometimes is when I have like a certain thought, and sometimes I think, oh well, is this from a higher frequency, or is it my own thoughts, or is it my
I
own doubts? And so how do we?
I struggled for years. What is my ego and when is it my spirit? And I was having a lot of problems with that. If it was something that I liked, I thought for sure it was ego. That is
Hmm.
definitely conditioning, because usually we're going to like what our soul wants us to do. even though we might have resistance to it or something like that. But it's okay to like what you're here to do. And I was so conditioned that even that would bother me sometimes. When I first started hearing spirit, I started singing Delta Dawn because she was a delusional person, and I identified with her because some of the ideas that would come to me were so far-fetched, it didn't fit my current reality. And it would be really hard for me to wrap my head around. But after 30 something years of following these little indications that I get, I realized that with spirit, there's nothing too far-fetched. So part of what we have to do is realize that whenever we do partner up with spirit, bigger things can happen than what our imaginations can actually wrap their heads around.
Yeah, because there's kind of this saying in Vietnamese where that's like you can't plan um, any better than the divine can plan, something like that, to that effect.
I've told people over and over, you cannot plan for synchronicity. You have to
Mm,
surrender to it. First, you have to open the door to it and then surrender to the higher intelligence. And that
hmm.
higher intelligence can come through us. Claircognizance, for instance, is one of the hardest for people to be able to use because we live in a polarized world right now, especially. So a lot of times when we get claircognizant type knowledge, the first thing we do is, how could you know? And we argue with ourselves and create dichotomy. And most people that I meet that are very strong in their claircognizance also know how to argue with themselves very well.
Mm. And what exactly is claircognizant?
Where the knowledge comes through and it's just a knowing, because the thing is with like clairsentient, you can feel it. I can feel it almost like it's a orchestra on my body, the chilly willies as we call them. And different, I'll feel things on my chakra 7, up on that crown, or different, or in my shoulders if it's ancestral, for instance, or things like that. So clairsentient, you have something tangible to go, oh, this happened. And then clairaudient, but I heard this word. I heard this. And so you have something to almost tangible to hold on to. Clairvoyant. Oh, but I saw this. And it was so powerful for me. I really believe it because I saw it. So all of those things, it's almost like you have something tangible within your senses that you believe yourself. But whenever we have clear knowing, 90% of the time, because of our conditioning, we go, how in the heck could you know? And we second guess ourselves through doubt. And that's another thing, is a lot of people do not have their self-worth and self-value really secure in this world in the society that we've created right now. The more that we do come back to ourselves and have our self-worth and our self-value, the more we're going to believe ourselves when intuition comes through. So I do think self-worth kind of goes hand in hand with trusting yourself and your own intuition.
But again, how do you differentiate that as it comes in? Like for you, with you and me, like when we're talking about something, and I would know, I actually can feel the energy. Like
You get
there's a chill
clairsentient.
that goes that yeah, there's a chill that goes down my entire body, and I can know that we're kind of onto something.
Well,
Um,
claircognizant thoughts have that brighter note to them for me. They stand out. It's more than just if I'm ruminating about something. And another thing with claircognizance is almost always it'll be something there's no way I could have come up with myself. The
mm.
knowledge is beyond my current knowledge. That's one way I know it's a claircognizant thought rather than just my ego.
Okay, so if you feel it or you get it into your head or you see it visually, how would you know that it's not you?
Some of that, well, first off, how do we know it's not us? What if we have a higher self? What if it is an aspect of ourself that it lives in another dimension that we've learned to tap into?
Mhm.
So it can be ourselves, even though it's more the divine aspect of ourselves, because that's what we're asking to come in. But, and it can be that for, we can look at it as a force outside of ourselves. I don't think the semantics necessarily matter about it. But first off, you've opened the door for it, is part of it. We've asked. And so with that, it's sent it out to the universe and it's going to come back to us. But also, I don't know, there's always been something for me that when those little things come through, even though I might think I'm crazy, it might be hard for me to believe, it doesn't leave me. And it's insistent in a different way than what, like ruminating, where you're just regurgitating your thoughts and you won't get off of something. There's a different feeling to it. It inspires a different, even though it's claircognizant, so it's coming through that clair, it does start touching on some of my other clairs as well. It's got a more electrifying force and I can feel it.
Mm.
But I have studied subtle energy for a very long time, and I have developed a faith and a trust in it over many years. And I do think some of it takes time, because you actually have to develop, especially if you don't trust yourself and you have kind of a lack of self-worth, it takes a little bit longer to get to it, because you have to have that connection with yourself to have connection to the divine being as well. A lot
Right.
of
And
it,
I think part of that is being authentic, right, with yourself.
part of it is being authentic, but I think a lot of it is also, we've been trained to be disassociated from our emotions, and our emotions have a bigger, important aspect within, for communication with the divine, because it like lives between our physical and our etherical body. The emotional body
Hmm.
does. And if we have constantly lived in disassociation from our emotions, I think that it's a little bit harder to go through those two layers, or get to that next layer. That and that's also, I think, where a lot of second guessing will come in, because again, doubt. So I think personally, I think disassociation is more of the issue, because we've been trained in this society to be disassociated from how we feel, whatever that might be. That we've been told emotions are bad.
Yeah, so like emotions, because oftentimes we're taught that to be a spiritual being, we have to always be calm and to not be emotional.
That's spiritual bypassing. That's not being a spiritual being. That's using spiritual modalities to shut people up.
Yeah, and I feel like even with if you go into different religions, um, and I'm not a religious person, but it's more like like say a Buddhist monk, right? They eat vegetarian and they shave their heads and they pray all day and they go up to the mountains and they meditate where nobody's around, and so it just seems like
It's easier to stay in that state without people aggravating you.
yeah, right? And so how, I mean, isn't the point is to be with people and to get to the point where you can be calm around all the chaos,
I do
right?
think that we have, I do think it's better to be interdependent, that we are an interdependent, but we have been forced into codependency. So we're actually having to unlearn some of the things that has been forced on us, so that way we can become, because interdependent means that we are already connected to the divine ourselves. So we have a little bit of understanding of where we're supposed to be. And boy, you walk into a room and you need help, and all of a sudden someone just walks in with that help. That's how synchronicity happens. So, there's the reason why it is difficult for us sometimes to access it is because we are so trained to be codependent, and we have to learn how to overcome codependency and come into a more interdependent state. And whenever we are interdependent, we aren't so tapped into other people, that we are, as empaths, are taking on all their emotions. You know how much I've worked on that myself within my relationship. And be more aware of where I start and where I end and other people begin, rather than lines being blurred. Because the more that we know what is important to us, rather than seeking other people's approval, then it's easier to follow whatever we might get intuitively. But if we're constantly looking outside of ourselves, codependent, for other people to answer our questions, to ease our worries, to ease our fears, and in this state of codependency, it's very hard for us to reach, into that divine realm. That there is a state, and a lot of people think that independence is the opposite of codependence, but independence is just the other side of the trauma response. I can do it by myself because I've been abandoned so many times. And it really is more of a trauma response than it is a healthy response. Interdependence is what we're seeking. That's the healthy place. And whenever you have that, you have a healthy relationship with your emotions. So you are automatically calm. I think one reason we're having a hard time with our emotions is because we've been trained out of them into codependency. And so we can't accept our own anger. And that there's a facility for that anger. If you get angry, you need to make a boundary. There's something that's happened, and you don't just have to kiss butt. You don't have to just get over it and be positive. Sometimes you need to set a boundary. And then that will give you a better space to be comfortable in yourself.
Yeah, so speaking of emotions, I feel like oftentimes, it's you can't be angry, you can't lose it and just, go off on somebody because that's just not nice.
Well, it's
But
not
it just seems
appropriate.
like, well, yeah. And so one of the things, like going back to that whole idea that we have to always be calm, but if you're angry at somebody, you should be able to voice that to them and say, what you
Well,
did made me really mad, or
if
or
we have a better
something, right?
relationship I think if we have a better relationship with our emotions, if we're angry, we realize there's a reason for it and we trust ourselves better. So rather than
Hmm.
reacting, we're able to respond.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
a lot of times our trauma response is not even, is because we don't believe ourselves, is some of it.
Hmm.
And that we don't trust that emotion is there because, yeah, someone just manipulated you and you felt it. You need to speak up for yourself and set a boundary, or whatever it might be. I think we've been told, oh, no, no, you just shouldn't have that emotion. So instead of dealing with it, we compress it down into ourselves, and then it comes out in a bad place somewhere else.
Yeah. And you
Repression and
basically
suppression.
explode at the wrong time, or something.
So I really
Yeah.
do think one of the number one things of being able to listen and channel spirit is we have to come into some kind of a good relationship with our own emotions and have a working relationship with our emotions.
Meaning that you just feel it as they come in, and then
Yep.
embrace
Allow
it,
it.
and then allow it.
Embrace it 100%. Because I think every time we reject it, it doesn't get rejected. It just suspends it and it encapsulates it in a way.
Mm.
But when we allow that feeling and whatever, and allow us we have to allow ourselves to be human in order to be human. We've been kind of told we're supposed to go beyond humanity here and beyond, that we're not a part of nature. We are a part of nature. And I think that she uses our emotions to speak with us. So, if you feel uncomfortable, that's your soul saying you're not in the right place. Change positions.
Yeah, but I feel like a lot of us ignore that feeling.
I think we've been trained and conditioned to. I'm gonna. An example comes to mind. I was caught in a situation of coercion for many, many years, starting from literal childhood, because I was so trained to that coercion and so disassociated to my own feelings and how that made me feel to be coerced. When I accepted my own rage and went, that doesn't feel good, my boundaries completely changed.
So everything
So
starts with yourself.
I think the awakening is, some of it is coming back and allowing non-perfection and humanity to exist.
But so how do you set boundaries in terms of energetic boundaries?
Energetic boundaries are so interesting, and I think it's a topic that I'm going to continue to learn on the rest of my life, and we could get into it for hours and probably never really completely get to it. Um, but a lot of what's going on in the world is the empath narcissistic type dynamic. And there's a whole subset of people that have learned how to make other people responsible for their emotions and their well being. And it's all done through manipulation. And so a lot of times it's hard for us to see where we end and other people begin. And I 100% believe we are telepathic beings. And a lot of times, the people that we're close to, we pick up their emotions, we pick up their thoughts, we pick up a lot of things, but we feel them in first person. So we just think it's ours. And there's no delineation between each of us. And
Mm.
all of that has been a lot of the conditioning. I think as we come out of it and we accept our emotions and we say, hey, instead of being disassociated, I'm going to go ahead and feel either the rage or the uncomfortable and find out the message that it's trying to tell me and how I need to change my life. So sometimes people do not listen to boundaries and you have to shut the door literally. And that's hard to do for some people. Some people have to be told more than once because they're dense, but you see that, oh, well, they didn't necessarily mean to. Yeah, intent matters when you're setting boundaries. I do believe, all of that. We can't expect perfection from another person. I don't think that's going to be a healthy boundary. But energetic boundaries, we have to know where we begin and where we end. And I actually think that starts with making our sacred space for ourselves. And we do that through connecting to the divine in meditation or prayer every morning. That helps us, first off, to have our own energetic sense. So we're not just sponging and being sponges off of everyone around us. Another thing is recognizing that we are antennas, and essentially with that, we're a sponge. So whatever we are attracting and we are taking that in. So it's very important that if we want higher frequencies, to set our antenna to a higher frequency ourselves, take that conscious intention and thought and make the effort to do that. Because the more that we do that and we have a higher self-esteem and self-worth, that when somebody is coming into our energetic boundaries, we recognize, wait a minute, that's not me, that's them.
Hmm.
But we have to have a sense of self. It's ego is not bad. The language around ego, unfortunately, is sad because they've just made it out to be a bad guy. Ego is whatever part of us that is seeking love that maybe it has never gotten the way it wants. And, I think it's important that we go through and we go in and feed our own ego. So that way it's not that 2-year-old that's hangry and throwing a fit. That, the more that we do love ourselves the way that we are seeking to be loved, the less that we're working out of ego. Instead of, we have to have, it's not so much the ego is bad, it's that we have to nurture it and bring healing to it and help it to be a healthy being. And so then it's a healthy ego. I think a lot of the wordage is really around unhealthy egos. It's not ego itself.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it because I've always thought of ego as a negative thing as well, and I think that's through the conditioning and how we're taught, and so to hear you say that is um, kind of gives me a different perspective because now you're like pouring in love and divine inspiration into it rather than looking at it as a bad thing. And the more that you nurture it, then the more secure we become as a result. And then we would, when we do connect to the divine, we would know the difference between whether it's really divine energy or our energy, right?
One that you perfect summary, 1000%.
Mm.
So to me, my goal is more about feeding and nurturing my ego so that way it's not reactive to the world around it.
Yeah, reaction is very important, and I think that when I am in that state of calmness, I don't react to things that normally would bother me, And so when I just kind of let it go and just be in that state of like oneness, I guess you could call it that, where your mind body isn't fighting each other,
And you know
mind
you're not
body spirit,
alone.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Where you exist within it and you're like best friends with yourself.
right, right. And when you're in that state of oneness, it's like everything is copacetic in a way. It's like, yeah, it doesn't bother me that he's going off on a tangent or whatever, right?
Right. And this is a not, I'm a trauma survivor, so some of this has been harder for me to, to access than what I say here. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, but I also think that my quest to get there was so strong in me from that, you know, because I didn't want somebody to be able to manipulate and control me ever again.
Yeah.
And and the number one thing to stop that from happening was learning energetic boundaries. Because I'm an empath. I will take on and try to help anybody's emotions and forget that I have them myself because I'm feeling everybody else's. And that's where we're not necessarily, that would be where I'm not directing my antenna and I'm just sitting there being a sponge and I'm taking in everything and I'm feeling it first person. But when I change it through intention, go, I'm going to direct my antenna, I'm going to reach for this highest frequency, and I'm going to create space for myself to be able to be in communication with the divine. When I do that, it's almost like this, that bubble comes around me. And when people do try to project their emotions on me, it does a more of a bounce off than it does get absorbed, especially as empaths. And we have a whole group of empaths out there, and they don't even want to go to the grocery store because it's too much energy and it all enters. That's where that connection with that divine frequency, as often as possible, even if it's just 5 minutes, hey, I'm fixing to walk into this and this is always a hard time for me, to spend that moment to meditate and connect before you walk into the grocery store. So that way you're not a sponge. You're an antenna. We can either absorb or emanate.
Right. And emanating is takes less energy.
But it is a verb. We have to take action to do it.
Yes. Right. And that
Through
comes with awareness, intention,
intent,
and
intent,
awareness. Yeah.
and coming from mindless to being mindful and choosing it by choosing to take that spiritual path and inviting divine, inviting the divine in to help.
Hmm. Yeah. As you were saying that example, I had this thought in my head of like Iron Man. You know how his armor goes around him. Is like, so you got to put that armor around you so that you're not affected by other people's emotions and stuff.
I love that example because really it's almost like energetic armor, and you
Hmm.
become a mirror and it just bounces off of you. But it's also whenever you're choosing a certain frequency and emitting that frequency, you're not a sponge at that moment. You
Right.
are you are being the transceiver and you're sending out rather than just being the receiver from whatever might happen in the earth. When I first started having visions, I have them first person. It feels like it's my body because we are all one. I don't see it. I don't have a vision of somebody else in third person. I have it in first person.
Do we ever get visions of other people?
I think so. I don't know. Like I said, anytime I've had them, it's actually been of stuff that's happened in the past, and I felt it like it was actually happening to me rather than it happens to somebody else. That's the kind I've
Mm.
had. Now, I have had flashes for other people, and in that way, it is they are themselves, and I'm not in their body. But I'm working one on one with them in a session or something like that. So it does come through in a different way. But like if I go to a site where something, I've traveled the planet and I've gone to where a lot of natural and man-made disasters have happened, and a lot of massacres. And every time I have a vision of that, it happens in first person. So I think it can go both
Okay.
ways. It just depends on what the focus is in that moment. But we have to have a certain amount of self-worth, because a lot of what has happened is our boundaries have been broken down. We have been trained into disassociation so we can be manipulated in the physical realm, in the mundane. And so it
Hmm.
takes that intention and actually, okay, I'm going to make the conscious choice to connect to the divine rather than running on the brainwashing.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that when I do that, I my day is better because I'm not being sucked in to all the drama that's going on in the world.
And then that brought the conversation completely full circle, that the best way to have energetic boundaries is by emitting what you wish to receive rather than just being a sponge.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons it's been hard for me to start is because the topic is so big, and I have some big passions within all of it. So it was almost hard to narrow down where to begin. And that's one reason I want to make it more interactive. We do have a list already of people that are putting in requests, and I'm definitely going to be
Mhm.
using that to pull off of. This started with energetic boundaries, but I want to get into the Akashic records, and there's it's a huge topic we could go on for 10 years without ever
Mhm.
repeating ourselves or just expounding on.
Yeah.
So
So, why did we name it Superpower and Sidekick as our podcast name?
by allowing the divine in to guide our lives. We're the sidekick, and we've asked something with unlimited perception to team up with us and to help guide us to go beyond what our imagination can come up with.
That's a better answer than when we first started.
It keeps evolving.
It's evolving. Yes.
We
Uh,
chose that name because it did go into several different ways.
yeah. And I think I chose Sidekick was because I had this image of a foot kicking us, just like whenever, source or spirit kicks us in the butt by repeating certain things that we still can't seem to get the
Well, that's what
message.
I think that's one reason why you and I have had such a good, long, strong friendship, is because we both have very strong spirits who like to kick our butts. And, even if we thought we were going to get off the path or go back to a regular life, it's going to kick our
Mhm.
butt and put it back on the path. I think, people
Mm.
who are pushed and it's just that's their drive, is because there's a reason behind it.
Yeah, yeah. But I like being on the path, and I
Me too.
felt like when I was off the path, I felt kind of lost.
I didn't like before I ended up on my knees, I didn't like what I created. What I have created since I ended up on not my knees, my chest. Once I did that, and I did that surrender, what I have, I ended up going to 65 countries, or 60, I'm sorry, 65 international trips, 20 countries. And I started doing things way beyond my imagination whenever I started co-creating with spirit rather than trying to wing it on my own.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just seems like when you try to plan things yourself or you want things to come out a certain way, it never does. And that's because it's not meant for you.
The best laid plans, right? And
Yeah.
I think it was, I don't remember if it's 2000 or 2001, but I jumped on a Greyhound to go from New Mexico to St. Louis, and the second I got on, I heard in my head, "You don't make your plans anymore. I do." And it was like this
Mm.
woo, woo, woo message when I got it. And just setting down my own plans so that way spirit could lead me to something even better than I could imagine. That took years for me to understand that whenever I do surrender and I let things go and I don't have to micromanage, that things actually turn out better than I could have ever dreamed.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's
and
def-
even sometimes when you can't see a path forward, it's like somehow, some way it happens and everything falls away, everything falls into place so that it does happen for you.
I'm having
It's
that happen
pretty
as we
remarkable.
absolutely. It is.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get into our own heads and it just doesn't end well.
And we've kind of been trained to look at things skeptically and almost
Hmm.
negatively, and this resentment that kind of goes along all the time, rather than looking at, if we don't know, that means that everything's possible.
Right.
Sometimes it's just a flip of perception. I came across the word, and I never do say it right, but purse capacity, having the capacity to perceive, because so often we don't realize that we are limited beings. And just because we have blinders on doesn't mean that there isn't a path forward that we just haven't seen yet. I mean, how many times have I lost my glasses and I look all over the place for it and I can't find it, but I finally surrender and just give up and go to the bathroom. But when I come back in, because I'm coming in from a different perspective, oh, boom, there they are right there. Sometimes we have to let it go before we can see what we really need to see. There is a
Yeah. Are you
surrender.
sure? Are you sure it's that, or are you just having a senior moment?
I'm sure I'm having both. Well, see, that's perfect, because it's like it doesn't matter how human you are, it can override that.
True. True. Yeah.
Somewhere in there, we need to say thank you for joining us, and please feel free to join the conversation and leave comments and ask questions. We want this to be interactive.
Yes. Definitely. Comment, like, subscribe. Isn't that what? Oh my gosh.
Perfect.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
Okay, close it on that.